Mr. Chairman, sir, I have the privilege of speaking to this august House for a second time today. And yes, I would say it is a particularly satisfying day in Parliament because twice I have seen that there is unanimity in the House on a foreign policy matter.
Very good.
Earlier in the day, I said foreign policy should be a subject for maximum consensus. I'm so glad that people are moving in that direction, and the support that I have heard from every speaker, there were totally 21 speakers, that is indeed something which is very heartening. It is also natural that there will be questions, there will be concerns, clarifications sought, and naturally when any bill is tabled, it is the obligation of the minister moving it to provide it. So, Mr. Speaker, sir, what is it today we are trying to do through this bill? We are upgrading a law which is 17 years old, which, like many other legislations, clearly needs updating. And updating laws and terminating antiquated rules are both part of good governance. So today is an exercise in one way of good governance. Now, to understand this particular bill, I would take you back to a legislation which was passed by this House in 1947. It's called the United Nations Security Council Act. And the Act essentially obligates us that central government will apply any measures not involving the use of armed force which will give effect to any decision of the Security Council. So we had made a commitment as part of our foreign policy at the very start of our independence. We are good members of the UN, and therefore if there is a UN Security Council resolution which requires action, we will implement it. Now, after 9/11 events happened, there was great concern about terrorists and unauthorized parties getting hold of weapons of mass destruction, their ingredients, their technologies. It was not something which was completely new. From 1970s, there were actually warnings and writings on this subject. But because of what happened at 9/11, this became a very major international concern. So the Security Council at that point of time passed a resolution, 1540, which dealt with this particular issue. And the two key provisions of this, which is relevant for this august House to look at. One, that it decides that all states shall take and enforce effective measures to establish domestic controls to prevent proliferation of nuclear, chemical and biological weapons, the means of delivery, and appropriate controls will include the said production, use, storage, transfer, trade, etc. What they did not do at that time in 1540 was to specifically refer to finance. And so when we moved this legislation in 2005, we took our provisions from the Security Council resolution. Now, since then, the importance of finance, and some members have raised this issue, was finance implicit in it? I will address that particular issue. This has been the subject of comment of the FATF. Now, all honourable members will understand the importance of FATF. FATF today evaluates whether countries are responsible in terms of their financial policy. We have seen countries who have done things, who have followed policies and actions which are not right, brought to account. And there are very significant consequences of that. I think most members are familiar with the countries involved. Some of them are very close to us. And the FATF has a recommendation number 7, which says countries should implement targeted financial actions to comply with Security Council resolution, and that they should freeze without delay funds and assets and ensure no funds and assets are made available directly or indirectly to any person or entity dealing with WMD. So it is this process, our initial obligation, the 1540 resolution, the 2005 legislation we passed, which today in the light of FATF deliberations and our own security and our international obligation and the importance of finance to this, which is causing us to come to you with this amendment. Now, some issues were, specific issues were raised. I will deal with them very quickly. I think Uttam Reddy ji, who was the first speaker, brought up this issue. You are referring to persons. You are not referring to entity. Now, I would like to inform him, sir, through you, that under the General Clauses Act 1897, persons is defined to include any company or association or body of individuals, whether incorporated or not, and it covers entities, companies and organizations, and that the original act which we are amending today also uses persons in view of this, and I think Premchandranji later on in his remarks recognized that. The second issue which came up was, what is the necessity for this? Can it not be done under current legislation? Why do we have to take the trouble of amending it? Now, many other countries have specific legislation. Germany has, Switzerland has Switzerland War Material Act. Germany has Germany's Foreign Trade and Payments Act. So there are many examples because FATF and the current requirements need a very specific reference to financing. What were we doing till now? Till now, we were issuing notifications under the UN Security Council Act of 1947. And what we would do, and this would relate to financial measures, and our notifications were implemented by the Reserve Bank of India and other involved government bodies. They would advise banks, they would do the monitoring, following order which MEA would regularly bring out. Our effort, Honorable Speaker, sir, today is to give legislative backing, so that this is not a one-by-one ad hoc measure, but there is a legal, statutory way of dealing with what is a continuous problem. There was an issue which was raised whether this is, why is this so limited? It is limited, and many honourable members have raised many other concerns. People have debated disarmament, they have debated world order, they have referred to
माननीय सदस्यगणों, अगर यदि सभा सहमति हो तो सभा की कार्रवाई बिल पारित होने तक बढ़ाई जाए।
So the issue is whether the proposal, is it very narrow? Speaker, sir, it is meant to be an amendment for a shortcoming or something which is missing in the current law. It is not meant to be a new law. It is not meant to be a broad policy directive. So I would like honourable members to appreciate it. I appreciate and understand a lot of what they have said on different issues. Many of them are not directly relevant to what we are discussing. In some cases, these are issues which, for example, there was a reference to BrahMos missile. I think Raksha Mantri ji has made a statement already on this issue. There were some other issues which came. I don't want to take all the issues. We are already at 6 o'clock. But I want to emphasize that the whole purpose of this exercise is to make a very specific change in law, additionality in law, so that this country's record, this country's reputation, this country's security is ensured by financial measures which the government is in a position to take. There was also concern expressed by Ritesh Pandey ji about whether, in a sense, businesses by mistake, whether they will get caught in this situation. को पता नहीं था, कुछ गलत कर दिया, किसी ने बताया नहीं. Again, in the past, we have an experience of this. We have outreach with industry. There is a way of communicating this. There is a list, a long list of individuals and entities who are already sanctioned. So I think anybody who's dealing with this business, who is looking at anything which involves weapons of mass destruction, the technology, their equipment, I think our reach out and the nature of the business would alert them to it. So I think the possibility that somebody would by mistake get caught in a financial law, that is something which is not realistic. He was also concerned that he said sometimes you get mistaken positives. You put one name, somebody else's name comes. A sanctions list is not a name. It is not just a name. A sanctions list, I have one in front of me. It has a lot of particulars. It has a person's name, it has aliases, it has date of birth, it has place of birth, it has nationality, it has passport number, identification number, address. So the possibility that that somebody would get mistakenly caught in a financial situation and therefore will be wrongly harmed, that is something which is, I would say, the experience since 2005 has not borne it out. If it has not happened in the last 17 years, I think members should be confident that that is something which would not take place. There was also an issue whether this would affect whether this would affect legitimate research and development. I think Jadev Gallaji raised that. I think that is again not the case. This is a very specialized. This is a very specialized area. I think most countries, most scientists, most governments are very aware of what they were doing. Manish Tiwari ji raised one particular case. This was relating to Bodh Gaya. He wanted to know whether NIA had made a charge sheet referring to WMD Act in the case of a Bodh Gaya incident in 2018. I would like to confirm to him, he is not in the House, that this was not the case. The FIR had mentioned it, but this was not a decision of the NIA, and when NIA took charge of the case, there was no reference to the WMD Act. A few broader, yes, Premchandran ji asked one very specific issue, saying that there was a reference to aid and to abet. And if there is aid and abet in the existing law, finance, why should you have a specific reference to finance? The judgment of our ministry, our finance ministry, our law ministry, and even our foreign ministry is that aid and abet were not sufficient. That it required something very specific on finance. FATF required it, and that Section 15 only refers to punishment for contravening Section 9. So he wanted this clarification, and he said if I give that clarification, he would be prepared to support the bill. So I hope he will support the bill. Now, over and above this, Speaker Sir, I will very quickly run through some notable points which people raised. There were references to extradition agreement. It's a very different matter. You know, what extradition agreements we have, what is our success, who we have been able to bring, who did what crime under which regime. It's a different subject. We will have, I suspect, differing opinions. We will not have the consensus that we have on foreign policy. The second issue, I think, is the relevance of this. I think Rajavardhan ji, made a very good point. We think of this like something in a movie, that, maybe science fiction mein ho sakta hai, koi attack ho sakta hai, nuclear. These things have happened in real life. Japan mein you had a sarin attack. You had these anthrax letters that he referred to. So they are not far-fetched scenarios. So we are dealing with the security of the nation. I referred to the broad purposes. Saugata Roy ji today and yesterday made a set of observations, not again specific to the issue. He felt I was very taciturn, I spoke very little. I think perhaps I'm reflecting of a government which does more and speaks less. Maybe he is comfortable with a period, and I end with, I noted the remarks of Nishikant ji that is it necessary for us, in fact he referred yesterday to Krishna Menon. Krishna Menon is known for the record of giving the world's longest speech in the United Nations. I think, yes, I assure you I can say the same in 6 minutes. So my point is, today we should be less concerned in foreign policy about giving gyan to the world. We should play our role, we should make our contribution, we should look at our national interest, we should do this effectively. And I am, Speaker sir, with your permission, referring to this because he made a very specific observation, saying our diplomacy is passive. At the same time, he said, but Prime Minister has spoken to Russia and Ukraine only. अब झगड़ा रशिया यूक्रेन के बीच में, who else will he speak to? So he's speaking to the relevant party. Maybe doing the relevant thing may look irrelevant to other people, I don't know. But the point I want to make is, we are today in diplomacy very, very focused. In the morning we had discussed one aspect of our diplomacy. Today we are looking at a policy and legal issue which is very pointedly aimed at something else. Beyond this, I would make the point that today there are big challenges. A lot of the challenges are in the disarmament, in the arms control, in the proliferation domains. There are regimes and laws in which we are part. One which many members expressed interest in is, where are we on the nuclear suppliers group? The nuclear suppliers group requires a consensus. There is a reason, and many of you are aware of why that consensus is not there. There are countries who genuinely have concerns which they are willing to debate. There are countries who seem to have another agenda, but are creating blocks to the consensus. So it is something that we are working on. But again, the House will appreciate that since 2014, we have become a member of the MTCR, we have become a member of the Wassenaar arrangement, we have become a member of the Australia group. So our role in global arms control, disarmament, proliferation, regimes and initiatives is today very strong. Our reputation is very good, and I believe that the passage of this bill will strengthen both our national security and our global reputation. So, with your permission, sir, this was my response.